Okay, folks, it looks like we got kicked out the room. Hi, everybody. They cut us off, so I had to start a new room. So if you can please retreat out the room. I am making you a co-host again, Michael. Invite to co-host. All right, folks. Are you there, Michael?
Yes, ma'am. I'm here.
Okay. It's Dr. Chavez. Yeah, it's Twitter's being our friendly Twitter. So I had to restart the room. So hopefully, please retweet out the room. And I will retweet it to my page. It just booted us out like it always does when you have something important to talk about. Part 2 X Black History Month. All right. Post. Hi, folks. Okay, so I got my two co-hosts. Got to get all my authors back in here. So, okay, there's Trayvon. Okay. Let me resend. If folks could please retweet out the space, I'm gonna try and send invites again to our authors. Okay, so let me get the link. Copy link. All right, so I'm. All right, let me go to. I'm going to my list and just doing the invites. So here is Dr. Dearty. Paste. All right. And then let me go to. See if I could just send it as an email. Go into. Okay.
Dr. Brown, I can send it as an email to everyone if you want to.
Yeah, I'm doing it now. You could just
Okay.
kind of get the room going if you could. Here's the new link, folks. Paste, send. So hopefully everybody will get that email and we can pick this up again. Boy, this is quite the undertaking. Okay.
For those listening, and I'm also including those who are listening in perpetuity, our space began and then it ended after about 20 to 30 minutes of speaking. So we're just going to pick up where we left off after that piece.
Thank you all for your patience, folks.
Yep, just retweeting the space. So
If you haven't already, please retweet so we can get folks back in here. Tag a
Also,
friend, tell a friend.
Dr. Brown or Michael, can you add me as a co-host?
I don't know if I can do that, but I will try, brother.
yeah, I'll do it. I thought I did have you as a co-host, but I'll do it again. The invite to
I
co-host.
don't have that. No, sorry, my dog's tripping
Okay,
over
I
here.
just sent it to you. All right. Okay, looks like you're co-host again, Mansoor. All right. The other practice went so much nicer. Dr. Dearty, can you unmute? He's listener, so we need to make him a speaker.
I've sent speaker invites to Dr. Darity, Dr. Greason, and Dr.
Speak.
Evelyn McDowell.
Okay. Dr. Darity, see if you can speak now, because I mean, I've done everything that I could think of to get your mic working. Okay, looks like you, okay, unmute now. It says you're a speaker. So hit your unmute button, Dr. Darity. Hi, Dr. McDowell. Okay. All right. Let's see, Dr. Gleason. Okay.
Dr. Darity, if you go to your settings and then go to the X app, you may have to allow the app access to your microphone.
We actually did that. I called him when we were on the little break, and he said the microphone was on, so I don't know why it's not working. So maybe we can go to Dr. Gleason to talk about his chapter on unequal housing. So we need to make you a speaker, invite to speak, and you should get an invitation to speak, Dr. Gleason, and you can go ahead and get started whenever you want. It still has you as listener.
All right.
Yes, yes.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate y'all. I know these platforms are very crazy.
Yeah.
So happy Black History Month, everybody. It is an honor to be in the conversation about the Black Reparations Project. My specialty for almost 25 years has been urban history and really, I'd say suburbanization, which for me has created a lot of the troubles that we're trying to solve by seeking reparations, particularly in the housing market. And so what I did with this particular chapter is look back over the literature of urban historians dating back into the 1950s and really tracing back to 1937 and the Federal Housing Administration's charge under the Second New Deal to provide low cost and affordable housing nationwide. But given the fact that much of it was governed by individual states or even counties or municipalities in terms of implementation, African Americans were excluded from the ability to participate in the housing market and gain the benefits, especially after World War II, when single family homes became the norm for what set the standard of middle class housing. And so most of my work has been about the destruction of African American communities as these suburbs grew out side of the cities, not just gentrification in major metropolitan areas, not just displacement of population, but the whole scale destruction of Black communities across the United States. And so that shaped my thinking about this particular chapter in reframing what urbanists have studied for so long. And so in this case, in looking at something that would complement the economic analysis provided by so many of the other chapters, I wanted to focus on strategic outcomes that what I've seen in terms of policy changes in the last 2 decades that actually lead to increased opportunity for African Americans, but still does not meet the need or the injustice that has been inflicted. And so most of my chapter is then talking about the issues at the bottom of the housing market, folks who are cast into homelessness, rental households that are abused by predatory landlords. I think of particular importance is my colleague Keeanga Yamada Taylor's book, Race After Profit, that talks about the ways that desegregation after 1964, and specifically under the 1968 Fair Housing Act, actually led to worse outcomes in the housing market for Black families. And what she describes it as is predatory inclusion, is that to be included in the market is to be cast into a sector where you could never realize the profits or the wealth gains that other sectors of the housing market achieve, particularly native-born white American households. And so that's where I take the historical evidence and lead towards a reparations policy, is to meet the needs that I see every day on the ground here in St. Paul and in Minneapolis and in dozens of cities across the country, really endemically across the states of the South, that the housing stock has been reinforced through racial segregation, and the profitability of housing wealth has been denied to Black families. And so to do this, I'm less concerned about the particular number of where we get to, although I'm glad to see those calculations. I want to see a process by which we require the kinds of discrimination and segregation that is standard be punished and become less profitable. And that Black home ownership, Black property acquisition, particularly the formation of Black housing cooperatives that lets us deal with the needs of the lowest income families, that deals with the needs of the folks most vulnerable within the housing market, can finally be addressed. Because even if we look back before the Federal Housing Administration in 1937, even if we look back to the Civil War and the Reconstruction period, we're still not grappling with the depth of the housing segregation that stretches back to the origins of the society. When you look in places like Philadelphia, Boston, New York, Baltimore, Maryland, these places were thoroughly segregated, whether or not slavery was an operation. And so this is we're now looking at almost 250 years of segregation, discrimination in the housing market. And there has to be a very specific process to close that aspect of the racial wealth gap. Housing is a particularly pernicious place where the incentives are all perverse and reward people for discriminating against Black households. So thank you for letting me talk for a couple minutes about the work.
Thank you, Dr. Greason. I do have a follow-up question about about your work in chapter 3. So in the chapter you mentioned how segregated housing prevented material prosperity from building and sort of economic building within Black communities. And then even after desegregation, other tactics were used in order to continue to stifle economic mobility and Black community economic building. And you have mentioned that to repair that may involve criminalizing some of those tactics that are used to subordinate Black communities and in the Black housing market. My question is about you also mentioned in addition to criminalizing, you also mentioned that it may be helpful for the federal government to underwrite or subsidize Black banks, Black insurance companies, and realtors. And so I wanted you to, if you could just speak some more about how those things being subsidized could increase Black communities and economic stability.
Thank you. I appreciate the question. The first half of what you said, I spent about 13 years working in conjunction with a real estate institute in the Northeast corridor between Boston and DC. And the way that I saw the appraisal practices, the housing inspection practices, the way the partnerships for profitability worked against renters, worked against people who were unhoused in order to keep them in poverty. And so criminalizing is an extreme measure. I think there'd have to be a sustained pattern of real abuse of potential renters and homeowners to send someone to jail. But I do think there can be severe civil liabilities imposed. And that's something where you could actually get direct wealth transfers to people who have been affected at the municipal level, at the state level, and also at the federal level. And actually, I should share a special announcement on that point. I just came from Eatonville, Florida, for the Zora Neale Hurston Festival at the end of last week. And the Southern Poverty Law Center, that has won many cases against various versions of the Ku Klux Klan and bankrupted them in different parts of the country, has now discovered a legal strategy that has prevailed in federal court to preserve and restore and bring funding back to historic Black communities that are in danger of being destroyed by predatory realtors. And so Eatonville, about a year ago, which is where Zora Neale Hurston grew up, it's what she wrote about in her most famous books of Mules and Men and Their Eyes Were Watching God. That community was about to be wiped off the map about a year ago, and we managed to put a stop to it. And the SPLC has come in and now won the preliminary hearings in federal court about how they have been discriminated against, how Orange County, Florida, has continued to try and divest and destroy the wealth basis for the Black families in Eatonville. And so we've won a major victory there that holds real impact going forward for other Black communities. And that speaks to the second point. That's the transition, is that prior to Brown v. Board, and I would say even earlier, prior to the efforts to desegregate the U.S. military, as a matter of necessity, African Americans had to build up an infrastructure, a social infrastructure, an economic infrastructure, just in order to survive in places like Harlem and the South Side of Chicago, in parts of Los Angeles. And so in these communities, there were smaller Black institutions that functioned. And one of the great ironies, this is why I point to Professor Taylor's work, is that these institutions are decimated and wiped out of the marketplace between 1965 and 1995. Very, very few historic Black institutions, economic institutions, survived desegregation and the kind of really terrible ways that we tried to integrate. And so my favorite story about this is Robert Weems's book, Desegregating the Dollar, where he talks about Negro League baseball in the 20s and 30s and early 40s. And that, yeah, it was desegregated in the sense that the star players could join Major League Baseball. But for the Negro League team owners, for the vendors, for the ushers, the people who made their living off of Negro League Baseball, they were never brought into major leagues. There was no place for the economy of Negro League Baseball within Major League Baseball. And this was true across journalism, across education. The way that we chose to desegregate, and I shouldn't say we chose, the way that the federal government and state governments in various ways failed to effectively desegregate and integrate, destroyed the infrastructure of the Black community. And so beyond the housing market and through reinvestment in Black housing markets, I think it's imperative that we rebuild that infrastructure that's been lost over the last 60 years.
Thank you very much, Doctor. I guess the question for me is, there was so much, because I view our legal system as a set of incentives and disincentives, right? So, is there a way to incentivize people to help us, right? To, as opposed to being a hindrance. You see what I mean?
Absolutely. And you see
Go ahead, I'm
attempts at
sorry.
this with like Cory Booker's empowerment zones. You see them attempting to make reforms within the legal and financial system to stimulate reinvestment in communities that have been neglected or even been damaged by the way the market functions. But they tend to be band-aids. They're not things that fundamentally reset the system to make it more functional. And so this is where you get to probably the most radical critique in my work, where I go back to the framing of the Declaration of Independence, where everybody forces their small children to memorize that we have certain inalienable rights, that there is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But when it comes to the Constitution, when you get to Article 5, they don't say you have the right to pursue happiness. They substitute for the right to pursue happiness with the idea of property, that property is an inalienable right in the United States. And we need to take a very, very serious look at that. And so my critiques that I've written about this point are that there is no equivalency between life and liberty and the right to accumulate property. But in the way that our political and legal jurisdiction operates, in order to have full access to your inalienable rights of life and liberty, you basically have to have substantial hold on some property, some asset, in order to really effectively defend your other inalienable rights. And to me, this is a horrific wrong that has worked against Black people for centuries. And so when we're in the particular circumstance when we as people were traded as currency for decades in order to underwrite the construction of the country and the states in these communities, that's the piece where we've never done any work to kind of reverse that fundamental damage of treating Black people as property. And therefore, there's a kind of inherent barrier in the law and the concept of the law that our acquisition of property is always questionable. It always is vulnerable to predation. And so I think if there's a fundamental way we look at the existing framework without rewriting the entire thing, it's to make very clear that property rights are not more important than life and liberty rights. And if we are able to secure that kind of revision of the system, I think it would be profound. It would sweep through and get rid of a lot of the kinds of problems we discuss.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Greason. I want to try to work backwards here. You had mentioned just the long-standing afterlives of slavery within housing. Just the fact that Black bodies were used as commodities, and how that continued even after slavery was abolished in this country. I want to take it um, back to chapter 2. I see we have Kramer and Brianna here as speakers. And Kramer, actually, we had ended the conversation. Well, the last phase ended. We were talking about the question of how much and why to sort of quantify the amount that is owed as reparations. And Dr. Logan talked about just the different estimations. I had put a post onto the Jumbotron, and at the end of that chapter, it was the minimum reparations was identified. Well, the minimum being the minimum being just for political purposes, right? But the minimum being 357,477 per person. Can you talk more about that number, and how that is the number that was achieved, and sort of why that number was used at the conclusion of this chapter?
Well, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes.
Okay. Well, basically, in the chapter, we're trying to come up with a comprehensive way of assessing the losses to African Americans from slavery and racial discrimination, using Dr. Swinton's framework, where he basically says that the cost of slavery and the cost of discrimination can be broken down into the value of labor expropriated or reduced value of labor, the value of lost opportunities to acquire capital, and so on, and pain and suffering. Of course, we couldn't address all these points, so we looked at some things that are quantifiable, and in the last segment, we talked about trying to estimate how to quantify losses from slavery. And it was mentioned that there was a land-based method using 40 acres and a mule, the current value of 40 acres and a mule as a yardstick. And Dr. Darity can probably say more about that method. Then there's a price-based method that was initiated in the groundbreaking edited volume of Richard F. America, The Wealth of Races, in 1990. And then I use a method that I contributed to the chapter, that's a wage-based method. And that basically uses census information from, of the enslaved population from the beginning of the country to 1860, and estimates for every year how big the enslaved population was, and calculates the numbers of men, women, and child hours that were available to the enslavers, and then multiplies these hours with the typical wages that were typical in the free labor market at the time. And those range from just 2 cents in, I believe, let me look at the numbers. 2 cents in 1790, and by 1860 it was 8 cents. So these are very tiny numbers, but multiplied together and compounded up with a a small interest rate of only 3% that barely makes up for inflation, we arrived at an estimate of in excess of $19 trillion for just lost wages. Then in addition, we did a calculation of what would be due if the loss of freedom was compensated by the same hourly rate that survivors of the of Japanese World War II internment were compensated, and that was, I think, 76 cents per hour. And with that, we arrive at the same 3% interest rate at a total of $36 trillion. And if we take 6% interest, the numbers explode to the quadrillions. So the point of this is to say that there are, and then this doesn't contain any estimations of racial discrimination after slavery. And in the end, we say basically you could add up all these the losses from all these historical injustices, and it would be a number that would be larger than the wealth gap is. But we recommend in the chapter to take the size of the wealth gap as a minimum number to be compensated, to eliminate the black-white wealth gap basically as a conservative minimum estimate of what should be compensated.
Thank you. And other authors, yes.
Mansour, I'm gonna jump in real quick because we are having difficulty getting some of the key authors up for some reason. So I think what would be cool if we invite questions from the audience, and if you raise your hand or you have a question or a comment that you like to make, then the co-host will bring you up. Hopefully, we'll get you up because it's not working very well on our end and allowing people to speak. So, is there anyone who has any questions? Raise your hand, please. Okay, well, maybe the hand raiser's not working either. Well, Michael and Mansour, did you guys have anything more? I'm really sorry that we weren't able to get Dr. Darity unmuted for some reason. Did you guys have anything more you wanted to share?
I did have some questions for other authors, but it seems like folks are having difficulty becoming speakers. But it looks like we do have some requests coming in for questions.
Okay, so if y'all can handle that, that'd be awesome. I saw Rella was up here, but then she disappeared. So, Michael, you and Mansour can handle those requests to speak or ask questions.
Yes, I'm helping somebody in the background. I'm sorry. Let me see what this request is. Yeah.
At least we can add some folks on here.
Yeah,
I
I
don't know what
see.
the magic trick is,
All
but
right.
so I'll go ahead and turn it back over to the co-host for questions.
All right. Mansour can handle this. I'm handling something in the background, please. I'm sorry.
Yes. So we do have. Why they do me like that? Who has a question? Please ask your question.
Thank you so much. And I would like to first thank Dr. Lisa Brown and Actify Press and yourself for having this space, to all of the authors who have provided such groundbreaking information that has helped those of us who are very passionate about justice, just giving us like a framework and information to study and to be able to recite. I want to express my infinite gratitude, not just for myself, but also on behalf of those that came before me, specifically my lineage. I have traced one of my trees to the 1600s in what is now known as Virginia. I have found, I think my fourth-time great-grandfather was a colored troop in the Civil War. His name was Kit Peoples. So just know that I feel extremely connected to the work that you guys do, and I am forever grateful. The question that I do have for the panel, if anybody is able to answer that, it might be kind of a vague question, and I do understand that. Are like what are some ways that we can counteract policymakers who seem to shy away from justice and promote universal policies as reparative justice? I hope that was succinct enough, but what I've been seeing is a lot of people are trying to get bills passed, but they're using the cloak of reparations, and I just think that that is one, against justice, and two, would actually backfire because we wouldn't actually be repairing the specific harms that were done to specific people. So that's the most succinct way I can ask it. I don't even know if it's an answer that or anything that can be answered, but I do want to say thank you to everybody.
It is. It's a great question, and I really wish that Dr. Garrity could get his mic to work because I think I know enough of their
Hey,
position to help provide.
sorry, but I'm in a meeting listening.
Okay, Michael, you need to be on mute because I can hear you.
Nope,
Um, I
sorry.
think I know enough about his and Miss Mullen's positions to talk about. They have always centered federal reparations as the goal and the focus. I know that they have talked about the importance of local organizations or local efforts organizing with the eye view toward the federal, and that in their actual chapter in this first part of the book they talk about detours and things that they think are going to be an inhibition to a federal reparations project. I know I recently saw some conversations going on about the pivot that was made to the efforts happening in California, which I'm sure was disappointing for a lot of people. And so they have kind of all lives mattered the reparations ever there. And that I talk about that in my chapter. And when we come back for part two, I will talk in great detail about the kind of hijacking that happens historically with a lot of black movements. One of them being there was a conference being held here in Texas, and that the black women wanted to have an agenda that included them. So they had put together, I think it was Dr. Rhonda Bondi. I'm trying to remember her name. I'm sorry right now. But they have put forth in this women's empowerment conference an agenda for black women. Well, then other women of color got mad, and so they ended up changing the focus to women of color. And you've seen like the emergence of terms like BIPOC and POC and, black and brown, these kind of terms. And it has forced us to decenter ourself and advocacy, while at the same time, certain other groups can do group specific advocacy. You have organizations and scholarships that are established for particular groups, which is fine. But why wouldn't we not be able to do those kind of centering? I think that the efforts by the OMB could possibly help us with that because we have grown as a country, but we have not maintained the integrity of the uniqueness of the Black American experience. And so, what has essentially happened is that we've engaged in what I know I've heard Antonia Moore was the first person I heard this say talk about flat blackness. But there are some unique aspects to what happened to us as being descendants of slaves and freedmen that are unique to us that are not applicable to more recently arrived immigrants. And so our needs are different, our histories are different in this country, and the advocacy in certain regards to repair need to be different. I know that Dr. Bentley Edwards talks a lot about maternal and child health. So until we get, and I mentioned this at the other spaces we have, an actual variable that allows us to disaggregate for our unique group, it's more difficult to make the case that we need specific repair because we kind of get lost in a sea of nebulous blackness. Does that make sense?
It does, and it's what I've seen with my own eyes. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you for the question. Um, I do want to, and also thank you, Dr. Brown, for being able to answer that question. I do want to say that because many of the authors aren't able to speak during this call, questions that folks asked, we might not have full answers, but any questions asked, including the question that was just asked, if authors have additional information to provide for them, that will be on February 26th when we host the second edition of this space here. But I do want to.
Hold on a second, Mansour.
There was another person who had a question, but
Hold
they
on
dropped.
a second. Rella keeps coming up and falling down. Rella, I keep trying to bring you, honey. I don't know what's going on because I saw you up. I'm going to try one more time. Let's see.
Yes.
Add speaker. And if you can unmute, Rella. Okay, I see you unmuted and you went back to speaker. So I think you might be. Okay,
Yes.
there you
Go ahead.
are.
Ask your question. Thank you.
Rella, we lost you again. I don't know what the world. Okay, let's see.
She just unmute.
To the space because we did actually have a conversation with Dr. Kramer. So hello, shout out to the room. I'm not sure why I keep getting disconnected, but I look forward to actually gathering my submissions for the next space. But I really wanted to see.
Oh no, Rella, it took you down again. This is
I
awful.
have never seen this happen before.
Okay, I know.
You can just keep going. You said you really wanted something.
That for some reason, I don't know why tonight your room is being targeted, but I truly appreciate having so many scholars in the space. And if I can say that, and definitely having the
And she's going again. This is awesome. Okay, so I see we have Mr. Otis. I'm gonna try and add you to see if it'll let you speak.
I'm gonna have
Connecting. Okay, go ahead, Mr. Otis. Unmute your mic.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank
Okay,
you.
I just before you got away from this issue about reparations and the equity. Anybody that knows me knows I've been hammering this from the start, even at the start of the California task force. When you use evasive language and persist in what you want to do, this is intentional. I've had conversations with Dr. Darity. I'm not going to put him on the spot, but I'm 70 years old. I grew up watching this all voices being heard mess that's been done here.
no heavy cream.
They used it
Heavy cream.
to create conditions in the California task force. Mike, we can hear you, and I'm not that important, but I
Oh, I'm
think I'd
sorry.
like to get this out as quickly as I
I'm
can.
sorry.
What's happening here is we have to actually set a line in the sand and define what reparations is. And I'm going to be very specific. Some of the people that I started with 10 years ago claimed that they understood what was going on when Dr. Darity was talking about this concept. And there's some precepts like number one, the predator, the perpetrator of the crime cannot benefit financially. And every one of these things that were championed in California were backed by philanthropists and charity. That's not and could not ever be the foundation of reparations. That was the first mistake. The second was watching elected officials who understood that they didn't have enough clout in the state that's supposed to be the model for the country. They don't have enough clout to get anything through that assembly. So anything that comes out of it is going to be a mockery of reparations. It's better to stop this mess and hope that California is a total failure than it is to make it a model when they're already telling you in the next 18 to 24 months, they don't expect to close that $37 billion deficit they have in their own accounting. This is stupid. As a matter of fact, I've watched how Liberation Ventures has picked off some of the best and brightest, and I started with them at AAACE, was there for the inaugural conference, had a whole lot more belief that they would have some integrity, and I'm going to call them out. When you see organizations that have split off from NASDAQ and CJAC and all of that, and then now they've become LEAP, and they literally tell you in their new presentation, the reinvention, that they are now working on equity and reparations. When in fact, we've been telling them, as Dr. Darity said, everything they've done has been racial equity work. You got to stop playing and putting paint lipstick on a pig and then deciding that it's okay to jump in the damn mud with him and you're going to come out looking like some angel. I don't give a damn about somebody's personal venues, but I do know that you will never get reparations if you leave it as a charity case. It should be dumped and scrapped.
Okay.
Good night.
Thank you, Mr. Otis. I appreciate that. And my stance, I don't really know enough about some of those other groups. But for me, I'm an advocate for anyone who wants to be civically engaged, even people I don't necessarily agree with. And so
Oh,
the
miss,
important thing is that you
excuse
are
me.
engaged.
I'm not saying, I'm saying we literally had conversations with them saying, it would be excellent to work on civic engagement, call it exactly what it is, and say that you're working toward federal reparations. Those options were there. Instead,
Yeah.
they took the easy road of somebody else is going to facilitate it by paying our way. Liberation Ventures, if you go to their website, it's all about companies and philanthropy. That will never get us to where we want to go. That's plain and simple. And I don't care what
Understood,
people think about it.
understood. And I think that the people who had that challenge, I hope they come to part two and be able to maybe speak to that as well. But for our purposes, this part was the part one, and basically why reparations are owed and why reparations are needed. The second part that we're going to do is going to get into the civic engagement and community engagement aspect of it, and how we might go about an implementation in a way that'll be effective in terms of an eye to federal advocacy. Historically, we have seen groups like the Japanese Americans, those persons who were damaged through the radiation exposure in Guam, those persons who were taken hostage in Iran. These people were given federal repair because the culpable party was the federal government. And although there are certainly some people, even in our groups, who have engaged in local acts of atonement or local acts of repair, um, our focus in the Reparations Planning Committee has been an eye toward the federal. And as you all know, it is Congress that does appropriations, not the President of the United States and not the Supreme Court. So that has been, what we saw as the best approach to reparations that would involve cash payments.
Thank you, Dr. Brown, for that response. There is another person who has requested. Lloyd Kelly has requested, but before we get to your question, I just want to let everyone know that because we don't have because all the authors who have a lot of scholarship in this content don't have the capability to speak tonight, some of the questions may Dr. Brown, Dr. Kramer, or Dr. Greason may not be able to answer fully for you, but we will be making sure that we get to these questions on February 26th when we do part two of this. And so, Lloyd, once you connect, go ahead and ask your question.
Uh, Good evening, everybody, and thanks for having us. I got here a little late, so I'm a little bit behind on what's been said before. So if I say something that's been addressed, I do apologize. But Rella asked me to get on because I worked with Marcel Dixon when he was running for state rep in South Carolina, and we came up with our reparations plan that from a kind of a different perspective. And our perspective was more, what are, as Mr. Otis said, what is reparations? And we basically said reparations is one thing. It is the payment for the theft of our labor. And the reason we focus so narrowly on theft of labor is because you really can't pay for the atrocity. I mean, you can't put a number on the atrocities. And I wouldn't even want to, because how much is a person worth if you hit them with a bullwhip? How much should that cost? How much, and then multiply that times 10 million or 100 million times is just not. So if we focus on the theft of labor, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I can.
I think again, Lloyd, because we don't have like Dr. Daddy, Dr. Kramer might want to say something about that. But the idea of paying for the
You
labor of a
dirty fucking niggers are never gonna get reparations. Go back to Africa.
oh boy, who brought that person up?
I tried to stop it. Somehow he slipped through.
Okay, let's be on top of this, co-host. Um, Dr. Darity and most of the economists who have written about this, we are not asking for reparations for the wages of slaves because we ourselves are not slaves. Dr. Darity talks about the racial wealth gap and how the racial wealth gap was the best metric to measure the inability to obtain the 40-acre land plots that were promised to the newly emancipated 40 million slaves. And so that is the direction that they took in their calculation. No one is looking to pay you a slave's wages.
And
And I personally, hold on one second, Lloyd. I personally myself don't use terms that denote you as being the slave. My position has always been Black American, descendants of slaves, and U.S. freedmen. And the promise is still available, and the promise still was made to their progeny. So, what the economists have done is to provide a calculus for the current status of the juxtaposition of white wealth to the black wealth deficit that is experienced currently by the descendants of slaves, in addition to the ongoing harms that have not been corrected post the Reconstruction and the protections that were to be afforded to us through the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. So I don't want to get too much into the economist stuff because that's not my area of expertise. If Dr. Kramer wants to jump in and say more about that, he's welcome to do that. But I wanted to recenter that particular question.
could I uh, respond to that?
Sure.
And with all due respect, Dr. Darity, I've talked to you a time or two before on other spaces, but with all due respect, I could not disagree more. And the reason I disagree with the idea of the wealth gap is because white people are never going to agree to it. They're just not going to do it. And unless you frame it in a way that lets them off the hook for the atrocity, or they're going to say you're taking this from me. They'll attach it to affirmative action. They'll do all these things, but you can't argue with we are the only group of people that were forced to work for free. And as far as what I am today, I'm an American freedman. That means that I am here because somebody in my family was a slave. And that's something that I embraced, something that I own, because everybody couldn't have done it. So, to your point about that it somehow degrades us, it doesn't. And one thing that I think we all agree on is that this country is still benefiting from the work that we did. So why not make it about the work? Unless we're looking for an apology, and those are two different things.
Yeah,
Those
I
are two
think that
very different.
maybe you didn't quite hear what I said. I think that we are certainly owed repair as a direct result of being the descendants of slaves, but I think you will be hard pressed making a political or social argument that you should be paid the wages that was due to a slave.
I think I take a slightly different approach, because with the calculations that we did with the wage-based approach, the idea is that the wages were never paid. So basically they have accumulated and they have not been passed down from generation to generation in the hands of the descendants. Instead, whatever capital was accumulated passed down from hands to hands in the white community that used to own the ancestors, so to speak. But so basically the unpaid wages are lost inheritances, and or not lost, but denied inheritances. And I think it does make conceptual sense to make an argument for reparations based on these denied inheritances. stemming from the unpaid wages.
So, Dr. Kramer, let me make sure I understand what you're saying. You are saying that the present day heirs are owed the wages, or were they owed, or is the position that Dr. Darity is talking about in terms of the wealth gap that the best juxtaposition to the current wealth position to whites is that of the racial wealth gap? Are you saying that your calculus includes paying you lost wages that was due to a slave? Or is it the wealth position? I just want to be
Well, I
clear.
mean, unpaid wages are wealth that is being handed from generation to generation. That's intergenerational wealth. So yes, it makes sense to talk about the wealth gap and about the fact that it stems from these atrocities like slavery, post-slavery discrimination. But I'm also concerned that the wealth gap itself is a very conservative measure of what was lost, because not everything that African Americans lost produced a positive effect for white wealth. For example, during slavery, the nighttime hours were lost to the enslaved. They couldn't make any decisions about how to spend their nighttime hours because that was the exclusive decision-making right of the enslaver. But the enslaver didn't make any money during that time because he needed to give the enslaved some rest in order to reproduce the labor and the power to work on the enslavers, in the enslaver's interest. So both parties lost during that time, and only during the daytime, when the enslaved were working in the fields for cash crop production, did the enslaver actually make money. So the white slave owners or enslavers earned or made less profit than what African Americans lost. Does that make any sense?
Um, Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna be honest with you. The economic stuff I get left to you guys who did that area, and so I really wish Dr. Derry could unmute his mic because I do not feel it appropriate for me to speak to that calculus because that is not the area that I covered in my expertise. But as I
I will,
said, from my recollection of Dr. Derry and Kirsten Mullins' work, they use the racial wealth gap as the metric by which we can best identify the loss of inheritance and wealth to the descendants of those who were enslaved in America.
Definitely. In our chapter 2, basically, we show that if you add up the individual atrocities, you end up at a number that's much larger than the wealth gap. But the wealth gap itself is a kind of a minimum compromise. That's at what is owed at a minimum.
Yeah, and so I'm getting back channel tweets for Dr. Dearty. He said no one said we were degraded, and I agree with that as well. So if you guys could just be a little patient for the second part two to raise some of these economic questions and allow Dr. Dearty to add to that, I would feel a lot more comfortable because,
Yeah.
as I said, that's not my area of scholarship.
Can I?
and I just also wanted to add that Lloyd had mentioned, I forget the exact question that he had asked, but he had said something about white people aren't going to agree to ... And I think that that question or that sentiment on February 26th, when we come back, that's a sentiment that Dr. Edwards and as well as yourself, Dr. Brown, can speak to in regards to interest convergence, as well as helping adults to learn more and also be on the side of this righteous justice claim.
Also, Monster, I'm going to read verbatim from the man himself because he did put a tweet, even though he can't unmute his mic. He said, "Nobody said we are degraded by our ancestors of the enslaved. The current wealth disparity captures the effect of what Thomas Kramer calls lost inheritance. If the concern is political viability, the plan for reparation that he and Kirsten Mellon have advanced requires no new taxes." Okay.
Can I add something to that? I think whether we agree or not that that our ancestors that were enslaved, whether we agree or not, those wages are owed to us. They should have had the right to pass that wealth down, and I think that's what we're looking at here. If they had the opportunity to pass that wealth down, they've earned it. We would be in a different state. I think that's what we're looking at, from my point of view. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
I think that that's not being lost. Say, for example, if in the past that the wealth were buttons, right, and everybody had buttons, right, but the wealth changed the gold. Okay, you have to calculate it based on the current situation, juxtaposition the other group who benefited, and I think that's why they have taken a position of the measure of the loss being the racial wealth gap. Again, I am going to emphasize that context is important as well, but I struggle with anyone making an argument that they are owed the wages that a slave would have had.
So can I? Hey, Dr. Brown, I came back on my primary page for some reason. I don't know why my backup page is being targeted, but anyhow, I think not. I think from what I hear is I hear a lot of people getting hung up on terminology, getting hung up on wordplay. And I think the specifics, which would definitely be helpful to get more context from Dr. Darity and Kirsten Mullen and the other scholars in the room. But it also is to put into context that the labor, if the slaves, our ancestors who were enslaved, were given wages based on labor that was for free, were to be paid, what would that number be? And I think because Lloyd was kind of cut off and he wasn't able to really give his full contextual thought. A lot of times I hear that a lot in a space, especially one like this that is very, very important because we have a lot to say. A lot of us, even myself, there's so much running through my mind in the conversation and context of just wanting to get out so much in one space because we never get this chance and opportunity every day to really process and go through the fundamentals of what does reparation look like for the descendant, for the freedmen, FBA, or whatever the terminologies now that we've approached the OMB for. What does that look like for us? And what does that actually look like for our ancestors who never got the opportunity, as Actify, stated, to really pass those down? And Mansour also very eloquently stated as well. We didn't get the opportunity to say, hey, we have legislators like in New York who are constantly putting up legislation on as a congressman or a state senator into government, bills that would say, hey, to the federal government, we want to tackle reparations for harms done to a specific group. The New York legislator just actually talked about bringing forward new legislation for Holocaust survivors again in the 2024 now year period about reparations. And so this brings me to my question, which I know will probably be answered on the next go round, but I wanted to have it on record. We need to find out how to look at the parallels between state and federal government and how reparations, like California did with the report, how would that look like instituting repair functionally on both levels because they
Well,
run
let me
parallel with
interrupt
each
real
other.
quick. Again, please make sure you come back and address that with the economist. But I will
Yes.
say something about some of the things I've been reading about New York. Several of these efforts are doing kind of like race-based reparations, which I think also adds another layer of complexity. I certainly know that that has been a part of the advocacy of some of the people in New York. And I think that it's going to be quite the challenge. And Dr. Edwards is just here, who is our constitutional lawyer, and he had to leave too because he had another appointment. But I'm just really appreciative of everything that people raised here. I'm just sorry that you couldn't get an answer by those with the expertise. But don't let it be an occasion for you not to join back. And we are going to cross our fingers and toes that this technology will not interfere with us going forward. I just think it's incredibly odd that of all the people, Dr. Darity and Kirsten Mullen could not join the group. But going forward, hopefully we'll have that resolved next time. Okay, Bella?
Well,
No, definitely, Dr. Brown, and I'm so proud of you. And I look forward to the next phase. This was wonderful. I think also maybe having a poll probably would help too, so that way that actually gives people, people can send in questions to you that you can do a poll on, and then that'll probably help the economists be able to answer questions. That's just a hostess tip to
No,
help
no,
you
I
in
think
the
that's
next round.
wonderful. But you in my technology game, right?
Yeah, that's okay. That's
I
okay. You're gonna get it.
yeah, I ain't even used the jumbotron yet, but I'm
That's
gonna work
all
on that
right.
for the next one. I
I
promise.
have faith in you. You're gonna get it, and your co-hosts were wonderful. So I look forward to the next one.
thank you, and thank you so much for that suggestion as well. For the sake of
So
time,
did you
Dr.
want to
Brown,
kind of
how do you
wrap
feel
things
about
up?
Dr. Brown?
Yeah, I said, did you want to kind of wrap things up?
Yes, how do you feel about just getting the questions from the remaining speakers and not responding to them, but just having the questions on record so that we can get to them in towards the end of the month?
Well, I don't want to have to be responsible for kind of collecting all that. They can put the questions in the chat, and I think they'll still be there. So if anybody has any questions that they still want answered, they can add it to the chat, and we'll make sure that we keep a record of that. But at this point, I really would like us to kind of wrap up because most of the people who had the strongest, questions or interests are not here, which are the economists.
Okay, well, for those who were requesting to speak, please add your question to the comments so that we can get to it when we have the full range of scholars here at the end of the month. And also, thank you everyone for coming out. I do apologize for any crude remarks that you may have heard. And hopefully, at the end of the month, we will be focusing on part two of the book. But there also were some things that were in part one that we weren't able to get to today, specifically about some of the more intricate detail of the afterlives of slavery through the New Deal era, as well as World War II, post-war, post-civil rights, and the ways in which the afterlives of slavery continued, as well as some scholarship regarding reparations as it pertains to education and also as it pertains to healthcare. And so we're hoping to, on February
Are
26th,
those, are those authors still here? I don't have a problem with you asking something for people who are here. I just didn't want
no,
to.
they're not, and
Oh,
they're not.
okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Um, And so my final comment would be thank you all for being here and for being a part of this movement, this very long standing movement. The Rella, who had asked the past question, she has Callie House on her her icon image, and for me, Callie House is one of the forerunners of this movement. And so thank you for having her image and her aura in the space as well. And have a wonderful night. I'm going to allow for Dr. Brown and Actify to end us.
Yeah, again, thank you so much for showing up and making contributions to the space. This is an opportunity. We want to give people voice. We want to give people question, and we want you all to stay civically engaged. Like I said, I don't always agree with what everybody says, but I do agree with active civic engagement among all citizens. And that I think that, the opportunity to do that in this space in a very unfiltered way is really pretty awesome.
I'm
A
sorry,
lot of
folks. I'm
times
on the
we
road.
get,
Thank you,
I'm
everybody,
sorry,
for coming, and that'll be that.
are we talking at the same time? Actify Press? I think you.
He might not be able to hear you.
Okay. Well, anyway, we will see you guys back on part two. And thank you all to all the scholars who were here today to talk about their chapters. And we look forward to seeing you all on the 26th. Take care. Have a good evening. Bye.